Thank you for the wonderful introduction. The scripture, without which I don't know where we'd be. I have the good fortune to work with people all over Iowa that care about our children. Now, how many of you have heard me speak yesterday? Okay, please bear with me. Some of the stuff will be repeated and there'll be new information. I don't mean to bore you, but some of the stuff that we'll repeat is very important. But we're looking at media and children and how the world is changing. And unfortunately, when it comes to media, we think it's changing rather drastically. And by some errors, I think, of judgment as a culture that we've made. When we teach a child to drive a car, they go through driver's ed. You ride with them. When you let them go in the car, you know the roads they can travel, the times with which they can use to travel, and the places that they go. The ability to guide them through this experience is powerful and strong because you know the landscape within which you're living. Well, we're giving access through smartphones and computers, any form of screen, to children like a car, except they can drive to places with violence, pornography, sexual trafficking, bullying, sexting. You've heard the ills, they go on forever. And this has been scary to us when we've looked at that. We look at the nature of Iowans and the nature of good people, like farmers in Iowa that grow corn and beans and cattle and hogs. If you're a farmer and a disease or an invasive weed threatens your crops, you don't sit around and ponder, what am I going to do? It's imperative that you act on that invasive threat. Well, we think the number one crop in Iowa are children, that they should be of the utmost importance and are most important for us to raise. And I think it's safe to say now that we see what can happen with use of the internet and media as a very invasive problem, a problem that invades faith, invades family, invades our communities. In essence, the responsibility falls on us as parents and adults. We were indoctrinated in sort of a passive response to this new technology that was going to change the world. And I am not a Luddite. This technology will change the world, but it's a tool. It's a delivery system. Even something as simple as a hammer that's been used to build homes from one end of the country to the other. Wonderfully benevolent tool. But if I hit you in the head with it, not so good. And worse yet, if I hand a young child a hammer in the house and say, take this hammer and go around the house, experiment with it, I bet not very many good things would happen. Now, that child would learn things, how they break, how they might get hurt, but probably without guidance, not how to use that hammer to build a home. And this is one of the mistakes we've made. Now, as an organization, I'm really proud to work with a lot of really smart and caring people from every level of governance and business and faith, the National Guard, public health. There's just great partnership in Iowa saying this is something we need to fix. The Des Moines School Systems, the Board of Education, we're all embarking on this. And if you go to our website, which is ahealthyiowa.org, you'll see some contact info there. You'll find a myriad of resources available for schools, for educators, and for parents. And everything we distribute is free. So I encourage you to go there and look. Are we okay?
I just got to check something.
Okay. So we have one basic mission: to connect young Iowans and those who care for them with the resources they need to live healthy and happy. It's a big thing. And it can change from day to day, and it has. Because in the 1990s, when this organization was initially founded, the biggest threats were drugs, alcohol, and tobacco. And that's what we were focused on. Then as the world changed and media took its place, all of a sudden we see the problem of the media exacerbating so many new problems, raising them to new levels of attention, putting them in the minds of young children long before they should be known. I myself was probably in high school or college before I knew what many of these things were. This was not the world that we grew up in. So to counter that, we developed something called the Iowa Digital Literacy Project. Now, I want to encourage you as I go through this information, if you do have a pressing question, if you feel inspired to ask a question, raise your hand. That's okay. We can migrate through questions as well as we can in my presentation. So when we look at what we're trying to do, we're trying to take situations like this where kids are out having fun and keep them from becoming a tragedy. We're trying to let children explore life, become social, but keep the consequences from becoming tragic. This is what guidance and rules is all about, where they can explore the world safely, not necessarily dangerously. We've had to deal with issues like vaping and looking at how the media glamorized vaping. And if you've been watching news in the last couple days, there are now 3 or 4 states in the United States that are suing Juul because here's what they did. They ran ads for vaping and e-cigarettes on channels like Nickelodeon, children's cartoon channels, where the average viewer was under 10 years of age. They deliberately marketed to children. Terrible statement about our society, but we also now know that terrible things are happening from children that are vaping. We're looking at the same kinds of risks with children and cell phones. How many of you have seen your own child or your friends, maybe even found yourself sometimes looking at a screen, looking at your phone? Again, it's a tool like a hammer. It has a purpose. For many of us, we couldn't do our jobs without having some amount of technology available. But there's a time and a place for everything. What are we doing to model the behavior of our youth? There was a study that came out almost 2 years ago. It was all over the news and the Today Show and everything on what was identified as the highest amount of social media use by any part of American population ever achieved. 9.2 hours a day. Women raising preschool-age children spent 9.2 hours a day in this study on the East Coast on social media. Now they're taking pictures of their children, they're talking to their friends and their parents, they're technically engaging with a good sense of community, probably not surfing in places they shouldn't go. But that child sitting there, watching people take pictures, watching them send them to somebody. The most noble thing, to share pictures of your children with friends and family. But if that child is watching it, what kind of behavior is that going to model when they grow up? We've seen it in the stores. They now sell play smartphones for children. And you see them with it in cribs. You see parents give their children a phone to keep them busy and occupied. Because busy and occupied is the primary vehicle that media uses to get children's attention. Bright lights, sounds. It wants 2 things from them, and I'll show you in the context of how they reason what those 2 are in a bit, but it wants their time, their physical time, and eventually it wants to train their emotions to act in a way that benefits whatever thing they're looking at. The media is not driven, for the most part, where children go, by idealism or even God's law. It's driven by profit motives. So they want their attention and they want their feelings. They want them to like stuff. Now, I am a cultural anthropologist, a high-risk behavior researcher, and in addition to being a dad, the title most described to me is futurist. Because what we're trying to do is to truly identify what these risks are so we can minimize the bad outcomes in the future. Unfortunately, most of our research is going back in time. We can see what the problem is, and then we unravel all the conditions, saying this is probably what caused it. And I'm going to spend some time focusing on how the world of media has participated in stealing a very important amount of time from our children's lives, and an important amount of time from the ability families and schools have to guide them and lead them in the right direction. So when we look at social media, we recognize that by its outcomes today, except for a small percentage of really good applications, there's many good things you can do on media. As a matter of fact, we're trying to encourage people to do more good things on media, go to more good websites, study important things, read books, use it as a tool intended for the betterment of society. not for the betterment of the organizations that are using it as a tool almost like predators. So when they look at a human being, and if you have a chance to ever read the books on people that designed the first Palm Pilot, which were the first novel research in neurophysiology on what can we create that will get a person's attention. And they put two things together, a screen with colors and a keypad with fingers. So we can get them to watch and touch. We can own them. Two major senses. And any human has 4 areas of primary reasoning: physical, emotional, intellectual, and intuitive. Schools are here to teach intellectual reasoning. Families are here to tie all of them together. But the world of the media focuses on physical, their time, and their feelings and their emotions, which for children are very, very vulnerable. Many of us have had a child that we've had to discipline and they go, "I hate you." We know in their hearts they don't hate us. It hurts when they say it. And eventually they learn to heal and they begin to understand what our intention was. And we need to teach them those intentions. But what's very important for us to recognize is, as humans, we raise our children longer in terms of percentage of our lives than any other creature on the face of the earth. That's a wonderful opportunity, but not only do we raise them for a long period of time, not like a bird, they get to a certain age, we kick them out of the nest and they're gone, though many a parent has used that to remind children they have to get a job or get their lives moving. We don't really mean it permanently. Not only do we raise them and teach them the values of family and faith that's important to them, we encourage them to continue that process on their own, to embrace their family, embrace their community, and build the world around those values. Where does the internet work? The web, an interesting word, like spiders use webs. It's outside of the framework. Here's what happens. Nobody would need a web very often. They can't drive the web by what you're already teaching your children. The values that you're doing. The choices that you make. The choices of what to feed them, what to buy them. What they need to do is they need to take those children away from this, cull them from that influence, and get them to think differently than the way that you're teaching them. That's what a large part of the web is. That's why it's such a threat to children. It is a landscape filled with predators. Now, they may be selling candy, they may be selling Pepsi, but they could be selling drugs, they could be human trafficking, they could be purveying pornography. It doesn't matter. It's so far away from caring about their family, their faith, and their community, that's where they're trying to get them. That's where they want them to go. And with this wonderful tool, they can do that. It's an interesting thing. They say that children are actually lonelier, and we'll talk about that too, when they spend a lot of time on computers. That people generally are lonelier. The irony is they then use the computer, because of its ability to influence their minds, to seek what they think is companionship. This is how human traffickers attract young girls, offering them some kind of emotion or love packaged virtually that they can't find in their lives. Basically, most of the interactions that aren't approved by family and faith and schools on the internet are an exercise in disruption, to take them out and away from those circles of influence that are meant to protect them, nurture them, and turn them into the adults that should be proud to live in the communities that you've created. Now, how does disruption work? It's very subtle. And it works on a lot of levels that sometimes we just look at curiously. It doesn't mean that they're bad or evil, but think about coffee. If we go back to 1960, this is essentially, if there was coffee on the menu, this was it. Now, we love, if you were trying to get somebody's attention, sometimes the best way is to distract them, to confuse them, give them too many choices. Where do we see coffee today? Same basic products, caffeine, sugar, a little bit of flavoring. But would coffee still be as popular? Maybe. It is for me without all the flavoring, but the fact is that this is a disruptive sort of technique Because you no longer sit there and look, should I have coffee or not? You're simply assaulted with so many decisions. It's which coffee. It has a way of taking you out of your game. Now, in terms of media, when we were growing up, when I was growing up, the ways that news and information could get into a home were so limited. That was wonderful. What did that mean? That means parents could keep an eye on most of the ways children could be influenced by the outside world. It was easy. Just to make it interesting, and it's more complicated than this because this is a few years old, media ecology today, no one person would know how to stop information getting to somebody on the web and the internet. It's too complex. There is too many ways. No matter how many ways you try and block it and stop it, they find ways around it. This is a tool, but it's being used by people that are not necessarily involved with caring for the individuals that they're addressing. So now we take a look at this culture, the anthropological side of it. I'll show a really brief model, and then we're going to talk about how this sort of works visually in our culture. See, the world has changed. There's great order in family. This could be a community, a school, but now we have this networked civilization. There's no barriers. You could have two children sitting next to each other, each on a cell phone, dealing with something 1,000 miles apart, halfway around the world. No connection whatsoever, other than they can push a button and go there. Now, so if you have a culture built on circles of influence where the greatest power is faith and family and community, and like society, we know there's good people all over the country, all over the world. We look at those boundaries. It doesn't mean that it has to be small. These boundaries can be big, but they're predicated on values and teachings that are tested, that are proven to have the moral and ethical standards we want our children to grow up with. Now, let's take a picture of a family unit, and I do this with the kids, so I'll do it here. Let's say a family is a herd of zebras, and a herd of zebras is running across the African savannah. And one of the young zebras gets a little curious about what's going on in the outside world. No, it's a zebra. Lions have to eat. It's the middle of Africa, that's fine. Maybe that's an acceptable casualty. But should our children be casualties of predators? Because the internet can do that? Should we allow that kind of predation? Is that part of the natural order of the universe? Let's hope not, because really I'm not the first person that would exercise a warning about lions. I mean, I'm not sharing much information that's different than you already know. What we're looking at is what are the tactics now? What can we do as parents and grandparents and educators to change the situation? We can't just go back and say, wait a minute, time out. We're taking all the smartphones away from our kids, all the computers away from our kids. But people have done it. Bill Gates, when he was interviewed years ago, and I think you can look this up online, somebody asked him how he deals with his kids growing up in a world with all this technology. His answer was, I don't let them use it because I know what it does to a child's mind. The creators of these products did not make them to corrupt youth and families. But they created such a powerful product, other people could use that to do that. But they knew to be careful with their own children, because that's the real estate. Get their behavior, their emotions, to adapt to new influences outside of the spheres of influences that you're building for them. Now, I took that video to grad students at Iowa State University and doctoral students and said I had a hard time finding one that wasn't too gory for schools. And their research was all based on how the media and advertising influences youth behavior. And they said, we have a scarier video. And I said, show it to me. And they did, and I'll share it with you.
Who are you, Crackers?
Scooby-Doo.
Now that's not as an exciting, sort of a scary experience as a lion getting that baby zebra. But then think about it. The highest order of emotion that we have, love, for our God, for our family, the highest order. Here, a young child, from watching a cartoon, likes a cookie that's not even a healthy food that they've never tasted, and calls it love. They love them oh so much. What is left for a parent or a grandparent, or for God for that matter, if at that young an age, the most powerful emotion we can share and teach a child can be stolen by an exercise of interacting with a cartoon and the media? And you'll find out later that not all media is bad. You know, we talk about, and I know in your community, and I don't want to be controversial, but you're not for many TVs. You don't like watching TV, right? I think it's a great practice. But keep in mind that cell phones and computers can go every place a TV can. And sometimes, in fixing the problem, we might have to look at interesting strategies. When we think about going on a camping trip with children, and you take a group of kids out to a campsite, you don't hand them each a bundle of sticks and a match and say, go start a fire. You light one campfire that the whole family and everyone gathers around. Right now, in a home with technology, some people go home and sit on their cell phone, other ones on their computer, and other ones on a TV set. You know, what we're learning is that maybe it would have been wiser if there's a TV, it's one TV, it's a family TV, the parents can control what's watched on that TV, and they sit and watch TV together. Now, if we can take that instrument, make sure it has good programming that you approve of, that fit into your family, it might work. I'm not saying that you need to do that, because there's a lot of ways to get to a solution. But we're learning that solutions are hard to come by. Schools that had children with cell phones started to say, we know this is disrupting their education. We're taking their cell phones away. And teachers or principals, they would either collect them at the main office or collect them in classes. They tried everything. It was a disastrous outcome. Parents even complained. The kids were complaining. It was out of control. Then somebody figured something out. A bright doctor said, you know, it's the taking of the cell phone away that makes the children angry, not the not using it. So they've learned now they have this pouch, and they put the cell phone in it. A teacher can lock it somehow, and the child can keep it with them. Or they have shelves in front of the class where everybody can see their phones, but they're all turned off. And then what they've eliminated is something called separation anxiety. The separation anxiety from the phone was the more dramatic influence on their behavior than the use of the phone, because they're addicted to the phone. Now, how many of you have smartphones or cell phones? How many of you have ever had to leave the house, get somewhere on time, and can't find it? It's traumatic. Psychiatrists and psychologists today have a name for it, which I've forgotten now, but it's a form of separation disorder. And the stress level that you encounter not finding your cell phone, they said, is equivalent to the stress of a mother losing their child in, say, a grocery store or department store, where they disappear for a few minutes and you can't find them. Just as stressful to lose your cell phone as to lose track of a child. Boy, we now know, measuring that way, it's a powerful addiction. But now let's think about these messages. That's an addiction. But the problem with it is if it's used improperly, it drives children to places they shouldn't go, because people are actually deceiving them. They're confounding them. They're confusing them. They're young minds. They're fertile. They want to learn. But they're learning from complete strangers that have no interest in their well-being. This is not a new phenomenon in America. Here are some advertisements from when I was a child. And these were award-winning advertisements here. They're almost embarrassing to show. They exhibit values and behavior that's completely unacceptable today. And yet this was common in that culture. It was still media. It was print ads in magazines. It was on billboards. It was handed out on flyers. So to condemn just a computer for doing something bad is wrong. Bad things have been spread by every form of media in history, and they've given them awards, even to the point where at times they used to talk about the health benefits of consuming alcohol, the medicinal benefits of smoking cigarettes. Now we see all over the internet the benefits of smoking marijuana. And as a matter of fact, it's getting even deeper because they're creating a culture in that web of children and even adults that now believe that things like smoking marijuana are the cool things to do. So we've been evolving in this culture because of a lot of so-called freedoms, a lot of influences that if we can't protect our children from them, can gain some purchase in their lives. And we're going to talk about how it does that. But here's an interesting quote from an experience expert at Google. The only people that refer to their customers as users are drug dealers and technologists. Fascinating thought. I just thought they're not even shy about it. They just say it. Our customers are users. And a big part of successful business when you have users is a form of addiction. Because the higher the percentage of people that get addicted to the substance, whether it's alcohol, tobacco, drugs, or media, those are the repeat customers. Those are the ones that use it excessively. Those are the ones that spend the extra money, buy the extra stuff, and end up engaging in the problems. But it's not just that. For as long as there have been advertising agencies, especially big ones since World War II, they've always said that we need to market to children because in our culture, even before computers, by 9 or 10, children had brand preferences. Now, before computers, they probably got their brand preferences from their mother, their father, an uncle, a brother, or a sister. They grew within the family unit. They ate what the family brought to the table and learned to like what the family brought to the table. They weren't saying, I want that because I saw it on TV, or I want these cookies because the Cookie Monster told me. So we've abdicated some of that responsibility, but we also live in a world where everybody, from cereal to milk to pop, are trying to influence the behavior, the likes and dislikes of children at a very young age. And we have measured some of those, not our organization, but the Iowa Youth Survey did, and I'm going to show you 3 charts relatively unrelated to media but are very important, and bear with me as I show them to you. I'll use a pointer to work with them. These are from the Iowa Youth Survey with 6th and 11th graders. This is specifically about youth access to substances. And what you see, and this is where I went at odds with the organization, and now they don't even do the survey in this way. They ask a different question because they realized they were getting the wrong answer. They would say, look, we did this, we tested these years over this 5-year period, and look at that reduction in 6th grade's preferences for having youth access to substances. So we must be doing a great job. Access is going down. But what they weren't telling people was that those 6th graders are these 11th graders. And look at what happened between 6th and 11th grade. 20% of them knew where to find drugs in their neighborhoods and alcohol and other bad things, and 70-some% by the time they were 11th grade. You can transpose those numbers to even younger ages for children knowing how to find pornography, knowing how to find violent movies. They did a survey in Iowa of several thousand young children, 13 years old. They asked the question, how many of you have accessed pornography at least twice in the last 30 days? 82% of the 13-year-old boys responded with yes. Even scarier, 48% of the 13-year-old girls. Most of which say they were encouraged by the boys to go there. Of course, it's demeaning to women. Boys would do that if they're not raised properly. So now we move into another slide. This is social pressure to use substances. We see the same thing. 8% of 6th graders, but over 1/3 of 11th graders feel pressured by their peers to use illegal or dangerous substances or to go to places on the internet that maybe aren't healthy. Same kind of numbers happen. And this slide, which we call positive student norms. Students reporting that it's okay to do those bad things, drink beer, wine, do drugs, go to a party where there's alcohol. That increased from only 5% in 6th grade to almost 50% in 11th grade. And that has been going down a little bit, so that's good. is about an 875% increase. For any investment, that would be a great return, but not that kind of return with our children. What is that telling us? That is telling us that somewhere between around 6th grade, probably 3rd, 4th, 5th, or 6th grade, there is some inertia that says no matter what we teach or what we do, because there's no teacher, there's no parent, there's nobody in the world that is trying to change their behavior to that negative a model in that age group. But we believe that that change in behavior is linked to the amount of time in their lives they're spending on the internet and social media, being influenced by people not in the family and community, or at least not by the people in your community that they should be listening to. So we've done some number crunching, and I'm going to have a better show of this, but we find out that the number of hours a week, if you add up the top 3, which is watching television, playing video games, and non-school computer use, you're talking over 50 hours a week of media time. And when they get into the important things, 53 hours a week for teens and tweens in Iowa. 4.5 hours a day on smartphones. 4.5 hours. I mean, 53 hours is more than a full-time job. If only you spent that much time on homework. When this was done in 2013, and I'm going to put the new slides, but they're terrible. 37% of 2 to 4-year-olds have TVs in their bedrooms. Now we are making some inroads in reducing that. And a huge percentage of all teens have access to the internet through smartphones or computers. And a very high percentage of them are texting, using social media sites that are unregulated. While they're there, when we think about those brand preferences, we saw those children different ages up through 9 and 10 years of age, we have to start realizing that in the average 50 hours a week on the media, children are exposed to over 3,000 brand messages. When I do assemblies with children, 2, 3, 4, 500 in a gym, we show them logos. I can show them 100 logos. And that assembly will get every one of those right. They'll know every company name, and they'll know most of their jingles or taglines. If I show them Tony the Tiger, they go, "That's great." If they'll know the rabbit from Trix cereals, I said, "Trix are for kids." You know, and it's much as chagrin of teachers because they think, I can't believe they remember all of those company names and all those brands, and they can't remember what they studied yesterday. But think about it, 3,000 brand images. They know logos before they know U.S. presidents. They eat this cereal before they pick up an apple. Yet if you put that cereal next to an apple, I might too. It's a very unhealthy cereal, the least healthy ever made in America, and it was taken off the market, but it was very successful. Well, one thing we learned, when you inspire behavior that's not good, an old adage comes to haunt us called practice makes perfect. Practice doesn't make perfect, it makes permanent. Practicing good things can be construed as a form of perception, and that's perfect. But if you practice bad things, they only become more permanent. If you watch a lot of TV, you're good at watching TV. You play a lot of video games, you're good at playing video games. Not really great life skills for continuing the mission of family and faith and community that we hope for them. And it's worse than that. How many of you know children that play video games where they eradicate, kill, or disseminate, or eliminate something? Any of you aware of children? They're around. They're very proliferous. Well, we live in a world where we ascribe the 10 Commandments. And there's one commandment that says, "Thou shalt not kill." Then why are millions of children in America playing video games where they practice killing? Why is God's law suspended when they're here? And these are teachable moments. Somehow they think they're exempt from this process. And one reason it's really scary is that if we take violent media or video games and we start, and I'll make this really simple because it is a complicated study. This is a simple chart. If we have a child that has basically a low index of hostility, very unlikely to have any aggressive behavior towards another child, and they play violent video games, they have a stronger disposition to violence than a child that has an innately high aggression index that doesn't play video games. They switch places. So we know, and children that have a predilection to violence and aggression, it just goes through the roof. So we know that violence and video games and media breeds aggression and violence in children. You should not let your children go there. There are 4 major effects. I don't need to go through them with you because they're all negative. They all become less social, less caring, less compassionate, no doubt less Christian. Again, you can't suspend God's law just because you're on a computer. I do focus groups. Asked 5th graders a few years back, and we had a whole slew of quotes. We voiced over some of the things they said about their experiences with media.
I'm fried from looking at the internet all day.
I OD'd on Facebook.
I'm hungover from video games.
Fascinating. They use the language, the vocabulary of addiction. And most of these children had no idea what addiction was. But somehow in life, they've learned to associate those words. So we know that they're thinking about this. We know that they're measuring the negative effects of this. And we also know that if they're alone on this journey and parents and friends aren't helping them avoid those experiences, that they're going to have more of them, more hangovers, more bad feelings. Because if they're already going there, there's something lacking in their lives. And let's take a look at why. I'm going to play, because I work with a great professor, Dr. Gentile. And rather than my talking the whole time, I have a couple of things where he talks about how children are influenced by media and how much time they spend on media. So I'll share that with you, and you can enjoy listening to him for a couple minutes.
If we look at how children are spending their time, the average American child spends half an hour a week actively engaged one-on-one with his or her father. That's not just in the same mood, that's actively engaged in some activity or a dialogue. The average American school-age child spends 2.5 hours a week actively engaged one-on-one with the mother, 4 hours a week doing homework, a half hour a week doing non-school related reading, and that may be a generous number, 10 hours a week on the computer, not for school purposes, 13 hours a week playing video games, and television at 31 hours a week. Now, I have no doubt parents matter, but they're not getting equal time. They're not getting anything close to equal time. You add up all these red ones, and that's 54 hours a week the average American school-aged child is spending in front of a screen. That's a full-time job plus 14 hours of overtime in front of a screen. What's really changed in the past decade is about 1/3 of the time kids are on one screen, they're also on another one. They're multitasking their screens. People are always saying things are getting so much worse, and I'm very skeptical of these claims. So let's look at some historical data. Back in 1950, there were 168 hours in the week. That hasn't changed. But back then, if we assume that kids also got too little sleep, maybe 7 hours a night, they're spending 49 hours a week on sleep. If we think all their personal care, dressing, bathing, eating, things like that are 3 hours a day, that's another 21 hours, 30 hours a week at school. That left kids in 1950 68 hours a week to do everything else. Time playing, or reading, or exploring, creating, going to church, spending time with family, spending time with friends, doing music lessons. Anything that you might care about has to fit into that remaining 68 hours a week, and that's how much time kids had in 1950 in America. By 1980, kids were cutting into that 14 hours a week with television, up to 28 hours a week in 2000, and it's up to 31 hours now. Video games are up to 13 hours now, and computer at 10 hours now. That means the average child nowadays has only 14 hours a week left over to do anything of value. Now, why should we care about this as educators? Well, there are decades of research looking at the effects of media on youth. And there are many different types of effects. If we just look at school performance, the more time kids spend with screen media, the worse their grades in multiple subjects. The thing that's been researched the most is media violence and aggression. And in a report to Congress, the U.S. Surgeon General said, "It's clear to me that the causal relationship between televised violence and antisocial behavior is sufficient to warrant appropriate and immediate remedial action. There comes a time when the data are sufficient to justify action. That time has come." You know when this was? This was 1972. We have known for a long, long time that media violence can have causal effects on youth aggression.
And now we found that even in children, in Psychology Today published an article about screen time making kids moody, crazy, and lazy. It was a great headline. But here's the thing that they found out, and this affects adults too. Bright screens would delay bedtime because it stimulates the brain and reduces their ability to create melatonin. It was harder for children to fall asleep, and we know sleep is a huge determinant factor in their good health and education. Too much screen time at a young age also physically damaged the brain. The brain develops differently. It's important to remember it's a very complex issue, but there's tremendous scientific evidence on that influence. When you use electronics at night, you're distorting their sense of night and day, and they're now correlating with excessive use of electronic devices at night with depression and more suicidal thoughts in children. A lot of reasons to not let them use them. And more screen time also gives you a higher level of stress, ambient stress. And keep in mind that a lot of these ills are because, see, this thing that we look to for all this fun or support, I could hug this computer as much as I want. It's not going to give me any love. And yet for some reason children are going there. Look at how much time. Now I agree, parents don't have as much time as they have years before to spend with their children. But it's more important today than ever that parents take some level of control over those hours that children have that are discretionary, other than leaving them to computers and screen time. They need to be doing stuff face to face. And this is where the power of grandparents, parents, even friends amongst peers and our school children is so important. Studies show that no matter how much screen time a child uses, now the presumption is that the highest, like if you have a child that does 4 hours of screen time supervised by you and it's all homework or it's all faith-based learning or it's all something constructive, that's okay. This will not apply to you. But we know, measuring teens in Iowa, that that's not the case generally. Generally the case is the vast percentage of the time is they're going places that they're not accomplishing good things. So if you reduce screen time in children, on all levels, and in adults it works too, you will improve their sleep habits, you will improve their health, and their school performance and grades go up. That's researched. So if you want to help your children get better grades, less screen time, less video gaming. If you reduce violent media, movies or video games, you reduce aggressive behavior. Now here's something fascinating. Where it's all about don't do this, take this away. If you can channel children to participate in media that's pro-social, positive media that's approved by the parents, the family, and the community, it actually makes them better people. It, by its own nature, is not evil in intent. It's the people using it to deliver stuff. This is no more than a mailman. It just delivers you. We've just given them access to all these places and addresses where they shouldn't go. And then we're also keeping them in this sort of world of continuous partial attention. How hard is it to keep a conversation going with a child nowadays? To actually sit down with them. How much patience do they have to sit with you and talk to you for half an hour or 2 hours? Especially with grandparents. How hard is it when you're trying to take away a cell phone or a game from a grandchild and get him to talk with you and sit with you? They don't know what to do. If their fingers aren't busy and there's not lights flashing. Well, that's part of how they're being conditioned to be multitasking, to be doing more than one thing at a time. See, humans can multitask. They're very good task switchers though. But when you switch tasks, you're actually less efficient than you are at any individual task. So multitasking is not a good thing. It's a necessity sometimes. If you're raising a baby, you have to wash dishes, make dinner, feed the baby. You've got to multitask in some instances. But we're talking about discretionary multitasking, doing things that aren't important to life, may even be dangerous to life. They really affect the ability of a child to learn. So we have the factors of too much screen time. Reducing it can better just about everything. You can use screen time in positive ways. Sometimes you have to find something positive to give them to do and supervise it to get them from doing stuff that isn't positive. Engaging in those decisions with them is an important part of parenting. You should be parenting just as strongly about where they go on a computer or a smartphone as you do as to whose home you go to or where they go when they leave the house. Because believe me, they're going to a lot of places you probably wouldn't allow them. And as a parent, one of the most powerful messages we've learned is to teach children perception of risk. Turn them into skeptical consumers. Show them where the demons are, where the lions are, what can be frightening for them. Because if you don't counsel them on these things, they will presume, because you haven't said anything, that's probably okay. See, they're going to think you know where they're going and you know that world, because children have in the back of their minds that parents really do know about everything. Fact is, we don't know where they're going. We don't know that world. And there's so much dissonance between trying to connect with children. It's a very hard task, but I pray that some of you attempt it. We did some presentations, and one which was really sort of large, involved almost 100 parents and well over 100 children, with a bunch of Lutheran churches in central Iowa, where Dr. Gentile had all the parents in one room talking to them about media and how things work, and I had all the children in the other room. Now, when I asked the children why they thought I was there, they said, "You're going to tell us not to do this, not that." I said, "Nope, no, I'm not doing that at all. We've separated you from your parents because your parents don't know what you know about media. We're going to inform them what's going on. Then we bring them both together to have a discussion about media in the home." Very productive. But one of the questions we asked those parents was, how many of you in the last year have really had what they felt was a powerful sit down with their children to talk about the threats they face with drugs, alcohol, tobacco, and media? Roughly 80% of the parents raised their hands high. Now mind you, I had most of their children at the other end of the church facility, and I asked them the same question. What percentage do you think those children acknowledged as a number of parents that had that conversation with them? It was less than 20%. Now, I'm not saying the parents didn't try, but they didn't connect. Because when it comes to issues where we really don't know where the children are going or what they're doing, we need to ask them. We need to give them the opportunity to be honest with us, and maybe not overreact, but react constructively to help them and guide them through these dangerous places. Because they may be the only ones that know where they're going. That's how diverse and how widespread it is. And when we've looked at perception of risk, this just happens to be about marijuana use and attitudes. Every place we've been able to measure and get children to acknowledge a perception of risk, we've been able to reduce risky behavior. That should empower you. If you talk about the risks of the media with your children and you help them understand it and you engage them in conversation and let them participate, you will reduce the number of children that engage in high-risk behavior. No matter what it is, whatever we measure, it happens. And that practice will make it perfect, because you're moving and trending in the right direction. We've studied a lot of factors, and we find that the most prevalent downside to excessive media use are things like sadness and depression. Even the kids that get so enthralled in playing the violent video games, they wake up in the morning, they may not have done their homework, they didn't get enough sleep, they may not have taken as much time for personal hygiene. They sense that something's wrong, but they don't always know how to fix it. They're children. They need help. So when we studied this sort of relationship to happiness, we think, well, is a parent justified in laying down a little bit more law on computer use and cell phone use and what they do and where they go, and demanding their input a little bit on what the world is like? Well, there has never been a correlation that we've been able to find with happiness that says that if you have more cell phones, more time on a computer, drink more beer. We've looked at every aspect of happiness in the face of the earth, and there's only one correlation. And now remember those hours that children spent on media that we showed you, the average child in Iowa, at 50 plus hours a week? And that didn't happen in the 1950s. It didn't happen when we were children. Well, the number one correlation of all our studies with happiness are the fact that if you spend face-to-face time with other human beings, you will be happier. That's it. That's the number one category. Time with other people. Face-to-face. That's more of a predictor of happiness than almost anything else that happens in life. And that's something we need to teach our children. We need to take that real estate back. that we're losing to the media and the computers, and take it back with confidence that what they need is faith and family and teachings and homework and the kind of responsibilities that are going to build them into better people as they get older. Because the nature of childhood is different. I mean, if we look at it today, we've seen this. We see cases like this all the time, and it's not new. We live in this world driven almost obsessively to always have the next best thing or what the other person has. And how do you take one child's, how do you change their behavior to be better on social media when they can go to a friend's house and probably do the same thing? Well, parents need to talk. Communities need to work together. Here's some interesting, if you haven't seen them, sort of fun videos talking about how we've sort of changed the way we look at technology in the world.
It is the newest,
even newer. Everything else is obsolete.
Just bought this one!
what the?
Oh, wait. Oh.
And now if you really want to get aged quickly,
Okay, I brought an item, and I would like you to tell me what this is. Do you know what it is?
I know, and it's not any ordinary phone. It's an olden time phone. Yeah, they used that back in the day.
Back in the day, you say an old-time phone. How long ago do you think this was used?
Oh, 100.
100 years ago?
Yeah, it doesn't even have no FaceTime.
I mean, we laugh. But think about it. Our children are growing up in an era where this is normal. They don't know a world without media. And that's one point I want to really impress on you, and that's the role of a parent and a grandparent, especially grandparents. Number one, we know from all our work with high-risk behavior that if a grandparent extracts a promise from a grandchild, they're more likely to hold that promise than they will with the promises they make to their own parents. No offense to anybody, but they tend to revere grandparents a little bit more because probably they're not always at odds with them in negotiating things. Well, by that same token, the grandparents in this world are the last generations of Iowans that grew up in a world without technology. And they need to show the way to our grandkids of being outside, going for a walk, playing a board game, putting that technology away and trying life without it. It's really nice and likable. And one of the things that I'm noticing, seeing the younger grades, especially the 4th and 5th graders, is many of them now growing up in households where mom, dad, and their older siblings are all always staring at cell phones and computers. They're starting to say things like, how do I get mom to talk to me about being on a cell phone? My brothers and sisters are like zombies. Their faces are always blue. They're staring at their screens the whole time, or they have their headphones on. Young children are starting to sense there's something wrong. It's the perfect opportunity to read books with them, to spend time with them, to keep media away from them, and let them grow up as children. And always never forget, because the world will change, and media is going to give these generations of youth growing up the power to do more good throughout the world than we could ever have imagined, and maybe learn more things than we could ever imagine. So I'm going to go through these slides fast, but there are a lot of things that say that good shows like Mr. Rogers and Sesame Street actually help children. And they've actually had good outcomes with children. But those shows are also an indication that a parent cared enough to determine what that child was going to watch. The child did not pick what they were going to watch. So they picked programming they felt would be good for their child, whether it's on Netflix or on a website or on a TV. It doesn't matter. So I can go through all the reasons, but then there's plenty of studies on this. And I have no idea what this slide, I do know what this slide is. But we're going to be finished so we can answer questions. I can share this slide through your organization if you like. I'll show you the beginning. Do you want to watch a 6-minute video, or do you want to have time for questions? Questions are more important. This 6-minute video shows young children watching Barney, the Barney Show, the friendly dinosaur. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. And those same children then watching Power Rangers. And it showed how it could convert those children from being happy and compassionate and playful to being violent. Just one viewing of a TV show. So very, very important to manage youthful exposure to violence of any sort, even in the guise of cartoons. You know, when people say, well, I'm not killing anything, I'm just eradicating it. Yeah, well, look up in the dictionary the meanings. It's not much different. But right now, parents and educators, this is a wonderful time of opportunity because we have the best opportunity to nurture our youth, to teach them, because any mindfulness and the practices of using computers and cell phones wisely will reduce their stress, will reduce their anxiety, will improve their health, will improve their grades. So there is no downside except for the grumbling of the children when you take some of their toys away. And what child doesn't grumble when you take away cookies and replace it with a healthy meal? It's the nature of being a child. As a matter of fact, there's plenty of time I've hit the cookie jar before supper that I knew it wasn't right and I wasn't a child. You know, we all as humans tend to trend that way, but when they're young and their brains are impressionable, we have to be more careful what we do in front of them and where we let them go. So on that note, I'll entertain questions. I hope did some of this help?